The letter arrived on a Tuesday, wedged between a disconnection notice from the electric company and a credit card offer that promised reward Elena Martinez would never be able to enjoy. She almost threw it away with the junk mail, but something about the cream-colored envelope, the way her name was written in actual ink rather than printed by machine, made her pause. Ms. Elena Martinez. The return address was from a law firm in Bakersfield, 3 hours inland from the coastal California town where she'd spent the last 8 years barely staying afloat. She opened it standing at her kitchen counter, still in her grocery store uniform, her feet aching from a double shift. Her daughter, Sofia, was at the table doing homework, her 9-year-old face scrunched in concentration over a math worksheet. The letter was brief and formal. It informed her that her great-aunt Rosario had passed away 6 weeks ago, and that Elena had been named as the sole beneficiary of her estate. Estate felt like too grand a word for anything connected to Aunt Rosario, a woman Elena had met exactly 3 times in her life, most recently at her mother's funeral when Elena was 16. There would be a reading of the will on Friday at 2 p.m. Elena's presence was requested but not required. "Mom, what's 7 times 8? Sofia asked without looking up. 56, Elena said automatically, still staring at the letter. She didn't remember Aunt Rosario very well. Just an impression of a severe woman in dark clothing who'd spoken Spanish with an accent Elena couldn't quite place, who'd given her a piercing look at the funeral and said something about having her mother's eyes. That Friday, Elena called in sick to work, a luxury she couldn't afford but couldn't avoid. She dropped Sofia at school and made the drive inland, watching the landscape change from coastal scrub to agricultural flatland to the brown hills of the Central Valley. Bakersfield rose from the heat like a mirage, all concrete and strip malls and the smell of oil refineries. The law office was in an older building downtown, the kind with high ceilings and ceiling fans that did nothing against the October heat. The lawyer, a man named Gerald Peterson with kind eyes and silver hair, gestured her to a chair that creaked under her weight. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Martinez. I'm sorry for your loss." Elena nodded, though she felt like a fraud accepting condolences for a woman she'd barely known. Peterson opened a folder. "Your great-aunt Rosario was quite specific in her wishes. She left you her property, a silk farm approximately 40 miles northwest of here in the foothills. The farm has been inactive for several years, and I should be honest with you, the main structure was damaged in a fire about 18 months ago." Elena's stomach sank. A burned building. Of course. Is there any money? Any cash or accounts? Peterson shook his head. "I'm afraid not. Your aunt lived very simply. The property itself is all there is, about 12 acres, and the structures." He slid a photograph across the desk. "I took this last month when I went to assess the estate." Elena picked up the photo and felt something cold settle in her chest. The building was barely standing. What had once been a long, low structure, maybe a barn or warehouse, was now a blackened skeleton. The roof had partially collapsed. The walls were scorched and crumbling. Around it, the land was overgrown with weeds and dried grass, brown from years of drought. "It's worthless," she said flatly. "Well, the land has some value. You could potentially sell it for development, though the location is quite remote. Water access is limited. It's not prime agricultural land." He paused. "However, there are property taxes owed. About $11,000 currently. The county has been patient, given your aunt's age and illness, but they will need payment eventually." $11,000. Elena's savings account had $462 in it. Her checking account had less than $100. She was 3 months behind on rent. "What happens if I don't claim it?" she asked. "The county would seize it for unpaid taxes, auction it off. You'd receive nothing." Elena looked at the photograph again. Her mother had left her nothing but debts and memories. Her father had disappeared before she was born. And now her great-aunt, a woman she'd barely known, had left her a burned building and a tax bill. "How much time do I have to decide?" "The county wants payment within 90 days, or they'll begin foreclosure proceedings." Elena drove home in a daze, barely seeing the road. 90 days to come up with $11,000 she didn't have for property that was worthless. She should just walk away. Let the county have it. But that night, lying awake in the apartment she shared with Sofia, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Her mother had talked about Aunt Rosario sometimes, always with a mixture of respect and fear. She sees things, her mother used to say. She knows things before they happen. Elena had dismissed it as superstition, the kind of mystical thinking that seemed to run in the women of her family, but had skipped her entirely. She was practical, grounded. She believed in what she could see and touch and prove. Still, Aunt Rosario had left her this property for a reason. The old woman had been deliberate, specific. Why Elena? Why not some charity, some distant cousin in Mexico? The next Saturday, Elena borrowed her neighbor's truck, promising to return it by evening. She packed snacks and water, dressed Sofia in old clothes that could get dirty, and made the drive back to Bakersfield and beyond. The directions Peterson had given her led to a two-lane highway that climbed into dry, rolling hills dotted with oak trees. They passed cattle ranches and almond orchards, abandoned homesteads, and new construction that looked out of place against the brown landscape. The turnoff was easy to miss, just a dirt road with a faded wooden sign that read Esperanza Silk Farm. Hope Silk Farm. The irony wasn't lost on Elena. They bounced down the rutted road for nearly a mile before the property came into view. The photograph hadn't done justice to how desolate it was. The burned building dominated the clearing, its blackened walls stark against the pale sky. But there were other structures too, smaller sheds that seemed intact, and beyond those, something that looked like rows of wooden frames, though most had collapsed or rotted away. "Is this ours?" Sofia asked, her voice small. "Technically," Elena said, parking the truck and turning off the engine. They sat for a moment in silence. Then Sofia opened her door and jumped down. "Can I explore?" "Stay close. Don't go in any buildings without me. There could be nails or broken glass." Sofia ran off toward the smaller sheds while Elena approached the main structure. Up close, it was even worse than the photo suggested. The fire had been intense, consuming the interior and leaving only the outer walls and a few interior support beams. The roof had caved in completely in some sections, exposing charred rafters to the sky. She walked carefully around the perimeter, her boots crunching on debris and dry grass. Windows had shattered from the heat. The door hung crooked on its hinges. Through the opening, she could see the destruction inside. Twisted metal that might have been machinery, piles of ash and rubble, the skeletal remains of what had been someone's life's work. This was what her great-aunt had left her. This burned-out shell, this monument to failure. "Mom, come look." Elena turned to see Sofia waving from one of the smaller sheds. She walked over, picking her way through tall grass and avoiding what looked like old irrigation pipes. The shed was about 20 feet long and maybe 12 feet wide, made of weathered wood with a corrugated metal roof. Inside, it was surprisingly intact. Wooden shelves lined the walls, though most were empty. There were a few old tools, some glass jars covered in dust, and in the corner, a wooden crate filled with what looked like books or journals. "Look," Sofia said, pointing to the walls. Elena looked closer. The shelves weren't just empty. They were covered in spiderwebs, thick and intricate, some of them spanning entire sections of wall. But these weren't the random, chaotic webs she was used to seeing in corners and attics. These had patterns, geometric precision that seemed almost deliberate. "That's weird," Elena said, moving closer. One web in particular caught her attention. It was stretched between two shelves, maybe 3 feet across, and the pattern was extraordinary. The radial threads formed perfect spirals, and in the center, the silk had been woven into what looked almost like writing or symbols she couldn't read. "It's pretty," Sofia said. "Like lace." Elena reached out to touch it, then stopped. Something about disturbing it felt wrong. She pulled out her phone and took a picture instead. They spent another hour exploring. The other sheds were mostly empty or filled with rotted equipment. Behind the main building, they found what had been the silkworm cultivation area, rows of wooden frames that had once held trays for raising the worms. Most had collapsed or been overgrown, but a few still stood, covered in more of those strange, intricate webs. "Mom, why did your aunt have a silk farm?" Sofia asked as they walked back toward the truck. "I don't really know, baby. My mom said she came here from somewhere else, maybe Spain or Portugal. She wanted to make silk the old-fashioned way, with real silkworms." "Did she?" Elena looked at the burned building, at the overgrown fields, at the evidence of years of abandonment. "I guess not very successfully." On the drive home, Sofia fell asleep against the window. Elena drove on autopilot, her mind churning. She couldn't pay the property taxes. She couldn't fix the burned building. The land was too remote and water-poor to be valuable. She should just walk away. But she kept thinking about those webs, about their impossible precision, about the way they'd made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. That night, after putting Sofia to bed, Elena sat at her laptop and searched for information about Rosario Martinez and the Esperanza Silk Farm. There wasn't much. A few references in agricultural records from the 1980s and 90s. A newspaper article from 1996 about exotic farming in Kern County that mentioned the farm as an example of niche agriculture. But then she found something that made her pause. A blog post from 2019 written by someone who'd visited the farm before the fire. The post was titled, "The Last Silk Weaver of California," and included several photos of her great-aunt. Rosario had been in her late 70s when the photos were taken, but she looked older, whether by sun and work. She stood in front of the main building, which had been intact then, a long, low structure with windows along one side. Behind her, Elena could see the wooden frames she'd seen today, but in the photos they were covered with white silk, billowing in the breeze like ghosts. The blog post described Rosario as secretive but skilled, one of the few people in California who still practice traditional sericulture, raising silkworms and harvesting their cocoons to produce raw silk. But what caught Elena's attention was a quote near the end. When I asked Rosario about the future of her farm, she smiled and said, "The silk knows what's coming. It always has. My great-niece will understand when the time is right." Elena read that line 3 times. Her great-niece. Rosario had been talking about her years before her death, before the fire, before any of this had happened. The silk knows what's coming. She thought about those webs in the shed, about their impossible patterns. She thought about her mother's words. She sees things. She knows things before they happen. Elena closed her laptop and rubbed her eyes. She was being ridiculous. Spiderwebs were just spiderwebs. Her great-aunt had been an eccentric old woman with failing eyesight and possibly dementia. There was no mystery here, just a burned building and a tax bill she couldn't pay. She should walk away. But she knew she wasn't going to. The mockery started the moment Elena mentioned the inheritance to anyone who would listen. At the grocery store where she worked, her manager Brenda had laughed outright. A silk farm? In California? Elena, honey, there's no money in that. There hasn't been for decades. You'd be better off selling the land for scrap. I might, Elena said, bagging groceries with practiced efficiency. I'm just trying to figure out what's worth first. It's worth whatever someone's willing to pay. And let me tell you, nobody wants burned-out farmland in the middle of nowhere. In the break room later, her coworker Marcus was more direct. You're going to drive all the way out there again? For what? To look at a pile of ashes? Girl, you need to focus on keeping the lights on in the apartment you actually live in. He wasn't wrong. The disconnection notice she'd received had been followed by an actual disconnection 3 days later. Elena had spent an evening with Sofia eating peanut butter sandwiches by candlelight, pretending it was an adventure before she could scrape together enough to get the power turned back on. At Sofia's school, the situation was worse. Elena had mentioned the inheritance to another mother during pickup, and by the next day, somehow everyone knew. The looks she got were a mixture of pity and amusement. I heard you inherited some old farm, one of the PTA mothers said, her tone dripping with false sympathy. That must be so stressful, having to deal with all that property management on top of everything else. Property management. As if Elena's burned building and overgrown land required the kind of attention these women gave their vacation homes. It's fine, Elena said shortly. I'm handling it. Well, if you need any advice about real estate, my husband works in development. I'm sure he'd be happy to look at it, give you some guidance about the best way to unload it. Unload it, like it was garbage, like it was a burden she couldn't possibly handle. Elena smiled tightly and made an excuse to leave. In the car, Sofia looked at her with worried eyes. Are people being mean about Aunt Rosario's farm? Some people don't understand, Elena said, starting the engine. They think because something looks worthless, it is worthless. But your Aunt Rosario left us this property for a reason. What reason? That was the question, wasn't it? Elena had been asking herself the same thing every day since she'd received that letter. That weekend, she made the drive again. This time she brought a notebook, a tape measure, and a camera. If she was going to figure out what this property was worth, she needed to document everything properly. The dirt road seemed even more rutted than before. The truck bounced and shuddered over ruts and washouts. When she finally reached the clearing, Elena parked and sat for a moment, just looking. In the morning light, the property looked almost peaceful. The burned building was still a ruin, but the smaller sheds had a kind of weathered dignity. The oak trees that dotted the property provided shade, and she could hear birds singing in the distance. Sofia ran off to explore again, while Elena started with the main building. She measured the perimeter, noting that it was larger than she'd thought, nearly 60 feet long and 40 feet wide. The foundation seemed solid, concrete poured decades ago, but still intact. The walls, though blackened and damaged, were thick adobe, the kind of construction that had been common in California before modern building codes. She stepped carefully inside, mindful of debris. The floor was concrete, cracked in places but not collapsed. The fire had consumed everything organic, all the wooden interior structures, but the bones of the building remained. With enough work, enough money, it could potentially be rebuilt. But who had that kind of money? Certainly not her. She moved to the sheds next, documenting each one. Most were in surprisingly good condition, just weathered and full of old equipment. One contained what looked like spinning wheels and looms, ancient tools for processing silk. Another held boxes of journals and records, though many had been damaged by moisture and mice. Elena carried one of the boxes outside and sat in the shade of an oak tree, carefully going through the contents. Most of the journals were in Spanish, filled with Rosario's precise handwriting. Dates, temperatures, notes about silkworm life cycle stages, records of silk production. But some pages were different. These contained drawings, intricate sketches of web patterns with notes scribbled in the margins. Elena squinted at one, trying to make out the faded writing. El Patron del 15 de Marzo, it said. Predis Lluvia. Correcto. The pattern of March 15th. Predicts rain. Correct. Elena flipped through more pages. Each one showed a different web pattern, each one with a date and a prediction. Some were about weather. Others were about events that seemed more personal. Visitor from the north. Letter with bad news. Fire in the east. And at the bottom of each entry, either correcto or incorrecto. Correct or incorrect. Elena felt that cold sensation again, the prickling at the back of her neck. Rosario had been tracking spiderweb patterns and using them to predict the future. And according to her notes, she'd been accurate more than 70% of the time. This was insane. Spiderwebs couldn't predict the future. They were just random patterns created by arachnids following instinct and environmental cues. There was no meaning in them, no message. But Rosario had believed there was. She'd spent decades documenting these patterns, testing her predictions, refining her understanding. Elena closed the journal and looked around. The property was quiet except for the wind moving through the oak trees and Sofia's voice in the distance, singing to herself as she explored. Why had Rosario left this to her? What was she supposed to do with a burned silk farm and a collection of journals about supernatural spiderwebs? She was still sitting there, trying to make sense of it all, when Sofia came running over, breathless with excitement. Mom, you have to see this. Elena followed her daughter back to one of the sheds, the same one where they'd seen the intricate webs on their first visit. But now, in the stronger morning light, Elena saw something she'd missed before. One of the webs, stretched across the back corner of the shed, had a pattern so precise it made her breath catch. The silk formed letters, Actual letters, clear and unmistakable in the streaming sunlight. 3 letters and a number. November 7th. Today's date was October 23rd. November 7th was 2 weeks away. What does it mean? Sofia asked, her voice hushed. Elena stared at the web, her heart pounding. This wasn't random. This couldn't be random. The precision was too exact, the letters too clear. She thought about Rosario's journals, about decades of predictions, about an old woman who'd spent her life listening to messages in silk. I don't know, Elena whispered, but I think we need to be here on November 7th to find out. The 2 weeks that followed were the longest of Elena's life. She couldn't stop thinking about that web, about those letters and numbers hanging in the dusty shed like a message from another world. November 7th. Something was going to happen on November 7th. But what? And why was she supposed to know about it? She went back to the journals, reading them late into the night after Sofia was asleep. Rosario's notes became more detailed in the later years, more specific about how to read the patterns. Certain configurations meant certain things. The density of the silk, the spacing of the radial threads, even the time of day the web was spun, all of it carried meaning. One entry from 2015 caught Elena's attention. The November patterns are always the strongest. Something about the cooling air, the change in seasons. The spiders sense what's coming before winter arrives. I've learned to trust the November webs above all others. November. The web had said November 7th. Elena knew she was being irrational. She knew she should be focused on practical matters, on how to pay the property taxes, on how to keep food on the table and the rent paid. But she couldn't help herself. She was drawn to this mystery the way metal is drawn to a magnet, helplessly, inevitably. At work, Brendan noticed her distraction. You okay, Elena? You seem like you're somewhere else. I'm fine, just thinking about the property. You're still wasting time on that? Girl, you need to let it go. Accept that it's worthless and move on. But Elena couldn't let it go. The mockery from co-workers, from other parents at school, from her own sister when she'd mentioned it on the phone, none of it mattered. Something was pulling her forward, and she had no choice but to follow. On November 6th, the day before the date in the web, Elena called in sick to work again. She couldn't afford it, but she could not go. She packed overnight bags for herself and Sofia, threw some supplies in the truck, and made the drive to the farm. They arrived in the late afternoon, the sun already sinking toward the western hills. The property looked the same as always, lonely and abandoned, the burned building casting long shadows across the clearing. Elena parked and helped Sofia out. We're camping tonight, she told her daughter. Right here on our land. Really? Sofia's eyes lit up. They'd never been camping before, couldn't afford it. Really? We'll sleep in the truck, and tomorrow we'll see what happens. What happens? As if she knew, as if the web had given her more than just a date. They ate sandwiches for dinner and watched the sun set, painting the hills gold and orange and finally deep purple. When darkness fell, the sky exploded with stars, more than Elena had ever seen living near the coast. Sofia pointed out constellations she'd learned in school, her voice full of wonder. Elena spread blankets in the truck bed, and they lay there together, looking up at the infinite sky. Mom, Sofia said quietly, do you think Aunt Rosario can see us? I don't know, baby. Maybe. I think she can. I think she's happy we're here. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She pulled Sofia closer, and they fell asleep like that, under stars that had witnessed millennia of human hopes and fears and wondered what tomorrow would bring. When Elena woke, the sun was just beginning to rise, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Sofia was still asleep, curled against her side. Elena carefully extracted herself and climbed out of the truck bed, her body stiff from the cold night. November 7th. Whatever the web had been predicting, today was the day. She walked toward the shed where they'd seen the web, her boots crunching on frost-covered grass. Her breath came out in white puffs. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of oak leaves and dry earth. The shed door was slightly ajar, swaying gently in the morning breeze. Elena pushed it open fully and stepped inside. The web was still there, stretched across the back corner, the letters November 7th clearly visible in the early light. But now there was something else. Below the date, the spider had added more. A new section of web, spun sometime during the night, formed an arrow pointing down toward the floor. Elena's heart began to pound. She knelt and examined the floor where the arrow pointed. It was dirt, packed hard by decades of use. But in one spot, there was a slight depression, a rectangular outline barely visible. She went back to the truck and grabbed a shovel from the supplies she'd brought. Sofia was stirring awake. "Mom, what are you doing?" "Stay there, baby. I need to check something." Elena returned to the shed and began to dig. The earth was hard and dry, resisting the shovel, but she kept at it. 1 foot down, then 2. The depression became clearer, the outline of something buried deliberately. At 3 feet, the shovel hit something solid. Metal. Elena dropped to her knees and dug with her hands, clearing away dirt and rocks. What emerged was a metal chest, maybe 2 feet long and 1.5 feet wide, sealed with a heavy padlock that had rusted solid over the years. She used the shovel to pry at the lock. It resisted, then suddenly gave way with a crack that echoed in the small shed. Elena lifted the lid. Inside were papers, lots of them, wrapped in waterproof plastic. And underneath those, something that made Elena's breath stop entirely. Gold coins. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, gleaming in the morning light. But it wasn't the gold that made her hands shake as she reached into the chest. It was what lay beneath the coins. Stock certificates, bonds, documents with official seals and signatures. And a letter, addressed to her in Rosario's precise handwriting. "My dear Elena," it began, "if you are reading this, then the silk has spoken truth once again, and you have found what I meant for you to find on the day it predicted. What follows will change your life, if you have the courage to see it through." Elena's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter, the paper crackling slightly despite the plastic protection. Rosario's handwriting was shaky but legible, each word carefully formed as if the old woman had known how important this message would be. "My dear Elena," it began, "if you are reading this, then the silk has spoken truth once again, and you have found what I meant for you to find on the day it predicted. What follows will change your life, if you have the courage to see it through. I know you barely knew me. Your mother and I were not close, though I loved her dearly. Our family has always had women who could see, who could read the signs that others dismiss as coincidence or superstition. Your mother had the gift, but rejected it, choosing instead the practical world of numbers and schedules. I do not blame her. The gift is a burden as much as a blessing. But you, Elena, you have it too. I saw it in your eyes at your mother's funeral, even though you were just a girl. You see patterns where others see chaos. You sense connections that logic cannot explain. You have dismissed this part of yourself, buried it deep, but it has never left you. The silk farm was never about making money, though I did produce some beautiful work in my time. It was about preserving knowledge that the modern world has forgotten. For thousands of years, silk has been sacred. The Chinese emperors knew this. The ancient Greeks understood it. Silk is not just thread, Elena. It is a bridge between what is and what will be. Spiders spin their webs according to patterns they sense in the air, in the earth, in the movements of energy that humans can no longer perceive. They are prophets, these small creatures, and their silk speaks truth to those who learn to listen. I have spent 50 years learning their language. The journals I left behind contain everything I discovered, every pattern I decoded, every prediction that came true. The accuracy rate improved every year as my understanding deepened. By the end, I could read the webs with 87% accuracy. But I'm old now, and my time is ending. The gift must pass to someone younger, someone with the strength to protect it and the courage to use it wisely. That someone is you. In this chest, you'll find resources to begin. The gold coins are yours to sell, enough to pay the property taxes many times over and to rebuild what the fire destroyed. Yes, I knew about the fire before it happened. The webs told me 6 months in advance, but I was too weak by then to prevent it. Some things must burn so that new things can grow. The stock certificates and bonds are more valuable than the gold. I purchased them over the years based on predictions from the silk. Companies that would succeed, industries that would boom, investments that others thought foolish but that the webs confirmed would prosper. The total value, as of the date I am writing this letter, is approximately $437 million. By the time you read this, it will likely be more. I know this seems impossible. I know you think I'm a crazy old woman who believes in fairy tales. But the numbers do not lie, Elena. Check the certificates. Verify the accounts. The silk does not deceive. This wealth comes with responsibility. The farm must be restored, not as a commercial enterprise, but as a place of learning and preservation. The journals must be studied and protected. The gift must be passed on to Sofia when she is ready, for I have seen the webs that she too carries the sight, perhaps even stronger than yours. There will be those who try to take this from you. Men in suits who speak of probate law and rightful claims. Scientists who want to study the phenomenon and destroy it in the process. Government agencies that fear what they cannot control. You must be strong, Elena. You must trust what the silk tells you, even when the world calls you mad. The date November 7th is significant beyond the discovery of this chest. On that day, something else will be revealed to you. Something the webs have shown me, but that I cannot explain in words. You must be present. You must be watching. The silk will speak, and you must listen. I wish I could have known you better. I wish I could have taught you myself, guided you through the early confusion and doubt. But perhaps it is better this way. You will forge your own path, make your own discoveries, become the guardian this knowledge needs for the next generation. Trust yourself, my dear girl. Trust the silk. Trust what you see in the patterns, even when logic screams that it is impossible. With love and hope for your future, Rosario. Elena read the letter twice, then a third time. Her heart was hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. $437 million. That couldn't be real. It couldn't be. But the stock certificates beneath the letter looked real enough. She pulled them out carefully, examining the seals and signatures. Companies she recognized: IBM, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon. Certificates dated from the 1980s and 90s, when these companies were young or just beginning, when investing in them would have seemed risky at best, foolish at worst. And Rosario had bought them because Spiderwebs told her to. Sofia appeared in the doorway of the shed, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Mom, what did you find?" Elena looked at her daughter, at her sweet face and trusting eyes, and felt the weight of Rosario's words settle over her like a mantle. Sofia, too, carries the sight, perhaps even stronger than yours. "I found," Elena said slowly, "I found what your Aunt Rosario wanted us to find. I found our future." She carefully repacked the chest, securing the lock as best she could, and carried it to the truck. Sofia followed, asking questions that Elena answered mechanically, her mind still reeling. $437 million. If it was real, if she wasn't losing her mind, if Rosario hadn't been a delusional old woman who'd squirreled away worthless paper and convinced herself it had value. But the gold coins were real. Elena knew enough to recognize that. There had to be at least 100 of them in the chest, maybe more. Even if everything else was fantasy, the gold alone was worth something. The sun had fully risen now, flooding the property with clear November light. Elena stood beside the truck, looking at the burned building, the overgrown fields, the sheds full of journals and mysterious webs. "Mom," Sofia said quietly, tugging at her sleeve. "Look." Elena followed her daughter's pointing finger toward the main building. The morning sun was hitting it at an angle, and for the first time, she could see something she'd missed before. The fire damage wasn't uniform. One section of the building, maybe a quarter of the total structure, was less damaged than the rest. The walls were still scorched, but they were intact. The roof had partially survived, and the windows on that section weren't just broken. They were covered from the inside with something that shimmered in the light. Spiderwebs. Thick layers of them, so dense they looked almost like fabric. Elena walked toward the building, drawn by something she couldn't name. Sofia stayed close beside her, both of them moving as if in a dream. The door to the less damaged section was different from the one Elena had entered before. This one was metal, painted red though the paint was peeling and faded. And it wasn't locked. Elena pushed it open slowly. The hinges creaked, and a wave of dry, dusty air rolled out. Inside was a room about 20 feet square. The walls were lined with more of those wooden frames she'd seen outside, but these were intact, protected from the fire by the metal door and the thick adobe walls. And covering every frame, stretching from floor to ceiling, were spiderwebs. Thousands of them, maybe millions of individual strands of silk, woven into patterns so complex and beautiful that Elena felt tears spring to her eyes. They weren't random. Nothing about this was random. The webs formed a tapestry of information, a three-dimensional library of knowledge written in silk. Some patterns she recognized from Rosario's journals, weather predictions, and temporal markers. But others were new, showing configurations she'd never seen, meaning she couldn't yet decode. And in the center of the room, lit by a shaft of sunlight from a hole in the roof, was the largest web of all. It spanned nearly 6 feet across, anchored to a frame that looked specially built to support it. The silk was thick here, layered and dense, and the pattern was so intricate that Elena's eyes struggled to follow it. But certain elements stood out. She could see the letters November 7th, again, larger and clearer than in the shed. And below that, more letters, more numbers, forming words and dates and predictions that stretched months, maybe years into the future. Sofia gasped. "Mom, it's like a calendar made of spiderwebs." She was right. Elena could see it now, the way the patterns organized themselves temporally, events marked and ordered, some already past, others yet to come. December 15th, Sofia read, squinting at one section. Big rain. January 3rd, visitor. February 20th, important letter. She looked at her mother. "Mom, is this real? Can spiderwebs really tell the future?" Elena thought about Rosario's letter, about the stock certificates in the chest, about the impossible precision of the date that had led her here today. "I don't know, baby," she said honestly, "but I think we're going to find out." They spent the next hour in that room, examining the webs, taking careful photographs, trying not to disturb the delicate silk. Elena found more of Rosario's journals stacked in a corner, these ones more recent, containing notes and observations from just before the fire. One entry was dated March 3rd, 2 years ago. "The fire is coming." The webs have shown it clearly for weeks now. July 12th, afternoon, electrical fault in the eastern section. "I could prevent it, should prevent it, but when I consult the deeper patterns, I see that the fire is necessary. Something must be destroyed so that something else can be found. Elena will come, as the silk has promised. She will dig where I have marked. She will find what I have left. And she will understand, finally, what our family has always been meant to protect. I am too old to rebuild, too tired to continue the work. But she is young and strong and stubborn. She will do what needs to be done. The silk is never wrong." Elena felt chills run down her spine. Rosario had known about the fire, had let it happen, had planned all of this, orchestrated it like a play where Elena was the starring actor who didn't know she'd been cast. It should have made her angry. It should have felt like manipulation. But instead, standing in that room, full of prophetic silk, holding journals that predicted the future with impossible accuracy, Elena felt something else entirely. She felt chosen. She felt purposeful. She felt, for the first time since her mother died when she was 16, like she belonged to something larger than her own small struggles. "Mom," Sofia said, pointing to a new section of the main web. "This one has today's date again. And look what it says underneath." Elena leaned closer, following her daughter's finger. Below November 7th was another line of text, freshly spun, the silk still slightly sticky. "Believe, begin, build." 3 words, 3 commands, 3 possibilities that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Believe in what the silk showed her, even when it seemed impossible. Begin the work of restoration and preservation. Build something that would last, something that would protect this gift for Sofia and for whatever generations came after. Elena pulled out her phone and called the lawyer, Gerald Peterson. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding surprised to hear from her. "Mr. Peterson, I need to know something. Those stock certificates and bonds in my aunt's estate, are they real? Are they legally mine? There was a pause. Well, yes, they should be part of the estate. But Ms. Martinez, I should tell you, the property assessment I conducted was primarily focused on the land and structures. Your aunt mentioned other assets in her will, but she was quite secretive about the details. Do you have documentation? I have stock certificates, a lot of them, and gold coins, and bonds, all in a chest she buried on the property. Another pause, longer this time. I see. Ms. Martinez, if what you're saying is true, we need to conduct a thorough inventory and valuation. This could significantly change the estate situation. These assets would need to be authenticated and legally transferred to you as beneficiary. How long would that take? Weeks at minimum, possibly months, depending on the complexity. Some of those certificates, if they're as old as you suggest, may need special handling to verify and transfer ownership. Elena looked around the room, at the webs that had predicted this moment, at the journals that contained decades of impossible knowledge, at her daughter who was running her fingers gently along a web pattern, reading it like Braille. I'll bring everything to your office on Monday, she said. We'll start the process. But Mr. Peterson, I need to pay those property taxes immediately. I need this land secured legally. Can you help me with that? If you have liquid assets, the gold coins for instance, yes. We could arrange a quick sale through a reputable dealer and use the proceeds for the tax payment. I can make some calls. Do it, whatever it takes. This property cannot go to auction. After she hung up, Elena sat down on the dusty floor, her back against the wall, and let herself fully absorb what was happening. She'd come here expecting to find a worthless burned building. Instead, she found a fortune, a legacy, and a gift that defied everything she thought she knew about how the world worked. Sofia sat beside her, leaning against her shoulder. Are we rich now, Mom? Elena laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. I don't know yet, baby. Maybe. If those certificates are real, if everything checks out, then yes. Very rich. Will we still live in our apartment? For now, we can't rush into anything. We need to be smart about this. She pulled Sofia closer. But eventually, no. We'll have choices. Real choices about where we live and what we do. Can we live here? At the farm? Elena looked around the web-filled room, at the burned building beyond, at the land that sprawled out under the November sky. Maybe, she said. Maybe we can. Would you want that? Sofia nodded vigorously. I like it here. It feels magic, like something important could happen. Something important is happening, Elena said softly. Something that's going to change everything. They left the farm late that afternoon, the metal chest secured in the truck bed under a tarp, the journals packed carefully in boxes beside it. Elena drove slowly, her mind spinning with plans and possibilities and fears. The property taxes would be paid. That was the first priority. Then she needed the assets authenticated and transferred. Then decisions about what to do with the wealth if it was real. How to use it wisely. How to protect it. And underneath all of that, the deeper question, what did she do with the knowledge in those journals? With the webs that predicted the future? With a gift that science said couldn't exist, but that she'd seen with her own eyes? Rosario's letter had warned her. Men in suits who speak of probate law and rightful claims. Scientists who want to study the phenomenon and destroy it in the process. Government agencies that fear what they cannot control. She would have to be careful. Strategic. She couldn't just announce to the world that she could predict the future using spiderwebs. They'd call her crazy. They'd try to take Sofia away, claim she was an unfit mother. They'd seize the farm, study it, destroy everything in the name of understanding. No, she would have to be subtle, smart. She would use the predictions quietly, carefully, building security and resources before revealing anything about how she knew what she knew. And she would protect Sofia. That was paramount. If her daughter truly had the gift, if she could read the silk even better than Elena, then she would need protection from those who would exploit her. By the time they reached the coast, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Elena glanced at Sofia in the rearview mirror. Her daughter had fallen asleep, her head resting against the window, her face peaceful. Elena thought about Rosario's final words. Trust yourself, my dear girl. Trust the silk. Trust what you see in the patterns, even when logic screams that it is impossible. She'd spent her whole life trusting logic, trusting the practical and the provable. And where had it gotten her? Working 3 jobs to stay one step ahead of poverty, raising her daughter in a cramped apartment, wearing clothes from thrift stores and counting pennies for groceries. Maybe it was time to trust something else, something older and stranger and more powerful than logic. Maybe it was time to trust the silk. The following Monday, Elena called in sick to work for what she knew would be the last time. She'd spent Sunday night going through every stock certificate, every bond, every document in Rosario's chest, making lists and taking photographs. The sheer scope of it was overwhelming. Certificates for companies that had become giants. Bonds issued by municipalities that had boomed. Investment documents that showed a pattern of prescient decision-making that should have been impossible. Gerald Peterson's office was the same as before, ceiling fans turning slowly, the smell of old paper and leather furniture. But this time, when Elena walked in carrying 2 bankers' boxes full of documents, his expression was entirely different. Ms. Martinez, he said, standing immediately. Please sit down. Can I get you coffee? Water? I'm fine, Elena said, setting the boxes on his desk. I brought everything. For the next 3 hours, Peterson went through the contents methodically, making notes, taking photographs, occasionally stopping to verify something on his computer. His expression shifted from professional interest to shock to something approaching awe. Ms. Martinez, he finally said, sitting back in his chair, do you understand what you have here? I have some idea. These certificates alone, if they're authentic and properly transferred, are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The Apple stock purchased in 1984, the Microsoft bought in 1986, the Amazon from 1997, these have split multiple times. They've appreciated by factors of thousands. He pulled off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Your aunt was either the luckiest investor in history, or she had access to information that should have been impossible to obtain. Elena thought about the webs, about journals full of predictions that came true 87% of the time. She was very observant, she said carefully, very patient. She studied patterns. I'll say, Peterson put his glasses back on. Ms. Martinez, I need to be frank with you. An estate of this size is going to attract attention. There will be taxes, significant ones. There may be challenges from other relatives claiming they have rights to the inheritance. There will be questions about how your aunt acquired these assets, whether everything was obtained legally. It was, Elena said firmly. My aunt never broke the law. She just understood things other people didn't. I believe you, but we need to be prepared for scrutiny. I'm going to recommend we bring in a team, estate specialists, tax attorneys, financial advisors, people who handle this level of wealth professionally. Elena felt her stomach clench. This was starting already. Strangers wanting to get involved, experts who would ask questions she couldn't answer honestly. I need someone I can trust, she said. Someone who won't ask too many questions about how my aunt knew things. Peterson studied her face for a long moment. Ms. Martinez, your aunt came to see me about 2 years ago to update her will. She was very specific that you should be the beneficiary. She said something I thought was strange at the time, but now I'm beginning to understand. What did she say? She said, my great-niece will need protection from people who think they know better. She'll need someone who can follow instructions without requiring explanations. Then she looked at me very directly and asked if I could be that person. He paused. I told her I could. I gave her my word. That word still stands. Elena felt something loosen in her chest. Thank you. I'll assemble the team carefully. People with excellent credentials, but also discretion. We'll move quickly on the property taxes and the authentication process. As for the rest, we'll take it one step at a time. They spent another hour discussing logistics. Peterson would contact specialized dealers to evaluate and sell enough of the gold coins to pay the property taxes immediately. He'd begin the process of authenticating the stock certificates and initiating transfers. He'd set up secure storage for the physical documents while the legal work proceeded. "One more thing," Elena said as she stood to leave. "The farm itself. I want to make sure it's protected from any future claims or seizures. Is there a way to do that? We can put it in a trust with you as the beneficiary. That would shield it from most legal challenges and provide certain tax advantages." He made a note. "Are you planning to rebuild?" "Eventually. It was important to my aunt. It's important to me now, too." "Then we'll make sure it's protected." Elena left his office feeling both relieved and anxious. Things were moving forward, but she was also losing control, handing her future over to lawyers and experts who would make decisions about her life. But she had no choice. She didn't know how to navigate a world of hundreds of millions of dollars. She barely knew how to navigate the world she'd been living in. Her phone rang as she was getting into her car. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Ms. Martinez?" A woman's voice, crisp and professional. "My name is Dr. Catherine Reeves. I'm a professor of entomology at UC Davis, specializing in arachnid behavior. I understand you recently inherited property from Rosario Martinez." Elena's hand tightened on the phone. "How did you know that?" "I've been trying to reach your aunt for years. Her work was, well, it was extraordinary. I heard through the county records office that the property had transferred to a new owner. I was hoping we might talk about her research." "What research?" Elena kept her voice neutral. "Her observations of spider silk patterns and their correlation with environmental changes. I read some preliminary papers she published in the 1980s, before she withdrew from academic circles. The precision of her predictions was remarkable. I've been trying to replicate her methodology, but without access to her full notes and data, it's been impossible." There was scientists who want to study the phenomenon and destroy it in the process. Rosario had warned her this would come. "I'm sorry, Dr. Reeves, but I'm not interested in discussing my aunt's work. Please, Ms. Martinez, I'm not looking to exploit anything. I genuinely believe your aunt discovered something important about arachnid sensory perception. If we could study her methods, understand how she achieved such accuracy, it could revolutionize our understanding of how spiders process environmental information." "The answer is no. Thank you for calling." Elena hung up before Dr. Reeves could respond. Her hands were shaking. It had started already. People sniffing around, wanting access to the farm, to the journals, to the knowledge Rosario had spent decades accumulating. She would have to be more careful. Much more careful. That evening, after putting Sofia to bed, Elena sat at her kitchen table with Rosario's journals spread before her. She brought several of them home, the ones that seemed most important, most detailed in their explanations of how to read the silk. One journal from 1998 had a section titled Basic Principles of Temporal Reading. Elena read it carefully, taking notes. "The silk speaks in layers," Rosario had written. "The surface pattern shows immediate futures, days or weeks ahead. The density of the weave indicates the probability. Thick and complex means highly likely. Thin and simple means possible but uncertain. The angle of the radial threads encodes temporal information. Steep angles mean near future. Shallow angles mean distant future. But beneath the surface pattern is a deeper structure, visible only in certain lights at certain times of day. This deeper layer shows larger patterns, movements of nations and markets, shifts in weather and geology, events that will reshape the world. Reading this deeper layer requires not just observation, but intuition, a willingness to see connections that logic denies." Elena thought about the main web in the burned building, the one that had shown months of predictions stretching into the future. That must be the deeper layer Rosario was describing. She read on. "The spiders themselves are not conscious of what they create. They are vessels, instruments through which larger patterns express themselves. The silk responds to electromagnetic fields, to air pressure changes, to vibrations in the earth that human senses cannot detect. When a spider spins its web, it is translating this invisible information into visible form. With practice, one can learn to request specific information. I have found that speaking aloud near the webs, asking clear questions, produces more focused patterns. The spiders hear the vibrations and respond, though not with perfect accuracy. Nothing is certain. The future is always in motion, always adjusting based on present choices. But trends can be identified. Probabilities can be calculated. Speaking to the spiders, asking them questions. It sounded insane, but then again, everything about this was insane. Elena looked at the clock. Nearly midnight. She should sleep, should rest before the chaos of tomorrow began. But she found herself thinking about the farm, about that room full of webs, about patterns waiting to be read. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through the photographs she'd taken. The main web was clearly visible, its intricate pattern frozen in digital form. She zoomed in on the section showing future dates. December 15th, big rain. January 3rd, visitor. February 20th, important letter. But there were other dates too, ones she hadn't noticed before. November 23rd, danger. December 7th, choice. January 15th, discovery. Elena felt her skin prickle. Danger. What kind of danger? And when it said choice, what choice was it referring to? She needed to go back to the farm. She needed to see the webs again, to study them more carefully, to start learning the language Rosario had spent 50 years mastering. But she also needed to be smart. If Dr. Reeves had found her this quickly, others would too. She couldn't risk drawing attention to the farm, to what was hidden there. Elena closed the journal and rubbed her eyes. She was exhausted, overwhelmed, terrified. But underneath all that, she felt something else. Excitement. Purpose. The sense that her life had finally, after 32 years of wandering in the dark, found its true direction. The next few weeks passed in a blur of lawyers and bankers and accountants. Gerald Peterson assembled his team efficiently, and Elena found herself sitting through meetings where people discussed numbers so large they stopped meaning anything concrete. Hundreds of millions became an abstraction, a concept rather than actual money she could hold or spend. The gold coin sold quickly through a private dealer for just over $200,000. The property taxes were paid immediately, with enough left over for Elena to catch up on her rent and utilities and buy Sofia some new clothes that actually fit. The stock certificates were being authenticated, a process that involved contacting the original issuing companies, verifying historical records, and navigating decades of corporate mergers and stock splits. It would take months, Peterson warned, but preliminary valuations suggested Rosario's estimate of $437 million was actually conservative. Current value was likely closer to $516 million. $516 million. Elena had stopped trying to comprehend it. Instead, she focused on the immediate challenges, like the mockery, which had intensified now that word had spread about the inheritance. At the grocery store, Brenda pulled her aside one day, her expression a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Elena, people are saying your aunt left you millions. That can't be true, can it? The estate is still being settled, Elena said carefully. It's more complex than I initially thought. But there is money? Real money? Some, yes. Brenda's face hardened. Well, that must be nice. Some of us have to actually work for a living instead of just inheriting fortunes from relatives we barely knew. The resentment in her voice was sharp enough to cut. Elena kept her expression neutral. I'm still working, Brenda. I'm here, aren't I? For now. But I'm guessing once that money clears, we'll never see you again. She wasn't wrong, but the contempt in her tone stung anyway. Elena finished her shift in silence, avoiding the break room, where she could hear her coworkers speculating about how much she'd inherited and what she'd do with it. At Sofia's school, the situation was even worse. The other mothers had gone from pitying her to resenting her practically overnight. One of them, a woman named Jennifer who drove a Range Rover and wore designer athleisure, cornered Elena during pickup. I heard your aunt was some kind of eccentric hermit who hoarded money, Jennifer said, her smile not reaching her eyes. Must be nice to get that kind of windfall. The rest of us have to actually earn our money. My aunt worked very hard, Elena said quietly. She lived simply so she could invest wisely. Invested in what? From what I heard, she lived on a burned-out farm in the middle of nowhere. Not exactly the lifestyle of a savvy investor. Elena thought about the journals, about decades of predictions that came true, about knowledge that people like Jennifer would never understand. Appearances can be deceiving. Well, I hope you'll be generous with your newfound wealth. The school fundraiser is coming up, and I'm sure they could use a substantial donation from someone who can afford it. The implication was clear. Prove you deserve this money by giving it away to people like us. Elena smiled tightly. I'll keep that in mind. But the worst mockery came from her own sister, Rosa, who called one evening after Sofia was in bed. Elena, what the hell is going on? I'm hearing rumors that you inherited millions from Aunt Rosario. Is that true? The estate is substantial, yes. Substantial? Elena, I'm your sister. Tell me the truth. How much are we talking about? I can't discuss specifics while it's still being processed. Rosa's voice sharpened. Can't or won't. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're suddenly too good to talk to your own family. And I have to say, I think it's pretty unfair that Aunt Rosario left everything to you. I'm family too. My kids are family. We deserve something. There it was. The claim Peterson had warned her about. Rosa, Aunt Rosario, made her decisions. I don't know why she chose me, but I have to respect her wishes. Her wishes? Elena, she was senile at the end. Everyone knew that. A good lawyer could probably challenge the will, argue she wasn't in her right mind when she wrote it. Elena felt anger flare in her chest. Don't do that, Rosa. Don't threaten me. I'm not threatening. I'm just saying, legally, you might not be entitled to everything. And morally, you should share with the rest of us. We're struggling too, you know. We have bills and expenses. Everyone has bills and expenses. Not everyone has a secret fortune dropped in their lap. Elena closed her eyes, fighting for calm. I need to go, Rosa. Think about what I said. Think about what's right. After she hung up, Elena sat in the dark kitchen, her hands shaking with rage and hurt. This was what money did. It turned people bitter and grasping. It made them see you not as a person, but as a resource to be exploited. Rosario had known this would happen. That's why she'd written the warning. That's why she'd emphasized the need to be strong, to trust herself even when others questioned her right to the inheritance. Elena pulled out her phone and looked at the photographs of the Webs again. November 23rd, danger. That was tomorrow. What kind of danger was coming? She thought about calling Peterson, asking for security or protection. But what would she say? That Spiderwebs told her to be careful? He'd already given her his word to not ask questions, but there were limits to anyone's trust. Instead, Elena made sure all the doors and windows were locked. She checked on Sofia twice before finally forcing herself to go to bed. But she barely slept, jumping at every sound, certain that something terrible was about to happen. November 23rd dawned cold and gray. Elena called in sick to work again, this time genuinely feeling unwell from lack of sleep and anxiety. She kept Sofia home too, telling the school she had a doctor's appointment. They spent the morning at the apartment, both of them tense without quite knowing why. Elena found herself checking her phone obsessively, waiting for bad news. It came at 2:17 in the afternoon. Gerald Peterson's number appeared on her screen. Elena answered with her heart already pounding. Ms. Martinez, we have a situation. Someone has filed a legal challenge to your aunt's will. Elena's blood ran cold. Who? A distant cousin, Marcus Delgado. He's claiming that he had a closer relationship with your aunt than you did, that he provided care for her in her final years, and that she verbally promised to leave the property to him. He's arguing that the written will doesn't reflect her true intentions. That's not true. I don't even know anyone named Marcus Delgado. Unfortunately, truth and legal strategy aren't always the same thing. He has a lawyer, and they've filed a formal challenge. This is going to complicate the probate process significantly. Danger. The Web had warned her. Today. Right now. What do we do? Elena asked. We fight. I'll need you to come to my office tomorrow. We need to gather evidence of your relationship with your aunt, any correspondence, any documentation that shows she intended for you to inherit. Do you have anything like that? Elena thought about the letter in the chest, Rosario's words written specifically to her. Yes, I have a letter she wrote, explaining why she chose me. Bring it. Bring anything you have. We're going to need it. After she hung up, Elena sat very still, her mind racing. The Webbs had predicted this. November 23rd, danger. And here it was, right on schedule. A legal challenge that could tie up the estate for years, that could potentially take everything away. But the Webbs had also shown other dates. December 7th, choice. What choice would she face then? And would knowing about it in advance help her make the right decision? Sofia appeared in the doorway, her face worried. Mom, are you okay? Elena forced a smile. I'm fine, baby. Just some legal stuff with Aunt Rosario's estate. Nothing for you to worry about. But Sofia didn't look convinced. She came and sat next to Elena on the couch, pressing close the way she had when she was smaller. Mom, can I tell you something? Of course. I've been having dreams about the farm, about the Webbs. They're teaching me things. Elena's heart skipped a beat. What kind of things? How to read them? What the patterns mean? Last night, I dreamed about a web that showed something bad happening today. Something with papers and angry people. Sofia, too, carries the sight, perhaps even stronger than yours. What else did you dream? Elena asked quietly. That it's going to be okay. That we need to trust what the Webbs show us, even when other people say we're wrong. Sofia looked up at her with those dark, knowing eyes. We're not wrong, are we, Mom? The Webbs are real? Elena pulled her daughter close. Yes, baby, they're real, and we're going to protect them, no matter what anyone else says. That evening, after Sofia was asleep, Elena made a decision. She couldn't just react to what the Webbs predicted. She needed to study them more carefully, to learn the language faster than Rosario had expected. Because people were already coming for what she'd inherited, and she needed every advantage she could get. She spent the next 3 hours going through the journals again, taking detailed notes, trying to absorb 50 years of accumulated knowledge in a few evening sessions. It was impossible, of course, but she had to try. One passage from a 2003 journal stood out. The greatest challenge of the site is knowing when to act on what you see and when to let events unfold naturally. Changing the future is possible, but dangerous. Every action creates ripples, and those ripples can wash away the very things you're trying to protect. I have learned, painfully, that some predictions should be observed but not interfered with. The web shows what is likely, not what is certain. Human choice still matters. Free will still exists. The silk merely illuminates probabilities. But there are moments when action is required, when the cost of inaction outweighs the risk of changing the pattern. Learning to distinguish between these moments is the true art of temporal reading. Elena thought about Marcus Delgado and his legal challenge. Should she fight it aggressively, or trust that it would resolve itself? The web showed danger today, but they also showed choice in December. Maybe the resolution would come then. She needed more information. She needed to see the Webbs again, to ask them specific questions the way Rosario had described. The next morning, Elena dropped Sofia at school and drove straight to Peterson's office. She brought the letter from Rosario, along with several journals that documented her aunt's intentions. Peterson read the letter carefully, his expression grave. This is helpful, but Marcus Delgado's lawyer is claiming that your aunt wrote this under duress or while not in her right mind. They're going to argue that her belief in supernatural spider predictions demonstrates mental incompetence. Of course they would. Use Rosario's gift as proof of her insanity. My aunt was brilliant, Elena said firmly. Unconventional, yes. But everything in those journals shows clear, logical thinking. She tracked patterns, tested hypotheses, adjusted her methods based on results. That's not insanity. That's science. I agree. But we need to be prepared for them to paint her as an eccentric recluse who believed in magic. We need to focus on the concrete evidence of her competence. The successful investments, the meticulous record-keeping, the fact that she maintained the property and paid her taxes for decades. They spent 2 hours strategizing, planning their defense. When Elena finally left, she felt slightly more confident, but also exhausted. This was going to be a long fight. On the drive home, her phone rang again. Another unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Ms. Martinez? A man's voice this time, deep and authoritative. My name is Agent Robert Chun. I'm with the Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. Elena's stomach dropped. The IRS. Yes, ma'am. We've received information suggesting that the estate of Rosario Martinez may involve assets obtained through illegal means. I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss the source of certain investments and transactions. This couldn't be happening. First a legal challenge, now a criminal investigation. I don't understand, Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. My aunt's investments were legal. She bought stocks and bonds through normal channels. I'm sure that's true, Ms. Martinez. But our preliminary review has raised some questions about how she was able to make such consistently profitable investments over such a long period. We need to rule out the possibility of insider trading or other illegal activity. Insider trading. They thought Rosario had access to confidential information, that she'd broken the law to achieve her success. How could Elena explain that the information had come from spiders? That temporal patterns written in silk had guided every investment decision? She couldn't. It was impossible. I need to consult with my attorney, she said. Of course. But Ms. Martinez, I should inform you that we have the authority to freeze assets during an investigation. If you refuse to cooperate, we may be forced to take that step. Freeze the assets. Stop the authentication process. Tie everything up in legal limbo while they investigated claims of crimes that had never been committed. I'll have my attorney contact you, Elena said and hung up before Agent Chen could respond. She pulled over to the side of the road, her hands shaking too badly to drive. This was the danger the Webs had predicted. Not just one threat, but multiple, all converging at once. Marcus Delgado's legal challenge, the IRS investigation, and probably more to come. She called Peterson immediately and explained the situation. He was quiet for a long moment. This is serious, Ms. Martinez. If the IRS believes there was insider trading, they can pursue criminal charges, not just against the estate, but potentially against you as the beneficiary. They might argue you knew about illegal activity and benefited from it. But I didn't. My aunt didn't. She understood patterns. Can you prove that? Can you demonstrate a legitimate methodology for her investment decisions? Elena thought about the journals, about 50 years of spiderweb predictions. Not in a way they'd accept. Then we need a different strategy. We need to show that your aunt's success, while unusual, wasn't impossible. That she had access to publicly available information, that she made educated guesses based on market trends and economic analysis. That's not what happened. I know, but it's what we need to argue. The truth, in this case, would be more harmful than a plausible alternative explanation. Elena closed her eyes. Rosario had warned her about this too. The need to hide the real source of her knowledge. The impossibility of being honest about the silk. What do I do? She asked. You go home. You spend the weekend with your daughter. And you let me handle the legal and regulatory challenges. That's what you're paying me for. But Elena wasn't paying him. Not yet. The assets were frozen, the estate in limbo. She was living on the money from the gold coins, which was running out fast. She drove home in a daze, her mind spinning. When she walked into the apartment, Sofia was already there, let in by the neighbor who had a key. Mom, Sofia said as soon as she saw her. Something's wrong. I can feel it. Elena knelt down and pulled her daughter into a hug. People are trying to take away what Aunt Rosario left us. They're saying she did bad things to get the money. It's not true, but we're going to have to prove that. The Webs will help us. They'll show us what to do. Elena wanted to believe that. She wanted to trust that the silk would guide them through this crisis. But doubt gnawed at her. What if Rosario's predictions had been flukes? What if the accuracy was just coincidence, confirmation bias, the human tendency to see patterns where none existed? What if she was staking her entire future on something that wasn't real? That night, Elena couldn't sleep at all. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind cycling through worst-case scenarios. The estate frozen permanently. Criminal charges. Losing custody of Sofia because the authorities decided she was mentally unfit, believing in prophetic spiderwebs. At 3 a.m., she gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen. She pulled out the journals again, searching for something, anything that might help. In a journal from 2010, she found an entry that seemed to speak directly to her current situation. There will come a time when you are tested, when everyone around you demands proof that you cannot provide, when the truth you know is called madness by those who have never seen what you have seen. In those moments, you must remember that the silk does not require belief to function. It simply is. Your task is not to convince others, but to act on what you know. Do not seek validation from those who cannot see. Do not apologize for gifts they do not possess. Stand firm in your knowing, even when you stand alone. Elena read those words 3 times, feeling something shift inside her. She'd been so focused on defending herself, on trying to make Peterson and the lawyers and the authorities understand, that she'd forgotten the most important thing. She knew the silk was real. She'd seen the predictions come true. November 7th, the date in the web, leading her to the buried chest. November 23rd, danger, followed by legal challenges and IRS investigations. The webs didn't lie, which meant the future dates they showed were also real. December 7th, choice. January 15th, discovery. Whatever was coming, she could prepare for it. She pulled out her phone and looked at the photographs of the main web again, zooming in on the sections she hadn't studied carefully before. December 7th wasn't just labeled choice. There was more text beneath it, smaller, harder to read in the photo. Elena squinted at the screen. Speak truth. Show proof. Trust the deep pattern. Speak truth. On December 7th, she would need to be honest about something. But what? And to whom? Show proof. That implied there would be evidence, something concrete she could demonstrate. Trust the deep pattern. The deeper layer Rosario had written about, the one that showed larger movements, events that would reshape everything. Elena set down her phone and took a deep breath. She needed to go back to the farm. She needed to see the webs in person, to study them more carefully, to ask them specific questions about how to navigate the challenges she was facing. But it was 3 a.m., and Sofia was asleep. She couldn't just leave. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she would take Sofia out of school, drive to the farm, and spend the day learning to read the silk the way Rosario had intended. Whatever was coming on December 7th, she would be ready for it. The next morning, Elena called Sofia's school and told them her daughter had a family emergency. It wasn't entirely a lie. Then she packed supplies, loaded the truck, and they headed inland. The drive was becoming familiar now, the landscape changing from coastal green to valley brown to foothill gold. Sofia sat in the passenger seat, unusually quiet, as if she sensed the importance of what they were doing. When they reached the farm, Elena parked near the burned building, and they both sat for a moment, just looking. "It feels different today," Sofia said. "Like it's waiting for us." Elena felt it too. The property had an expectant quality, as if the land itself knew they were coming, knew what they needed. They walked to the web-filled room together, pushing open the red metal door. Inside, nothing had changed. The webs still hung in their intricate patterns, layer upon layer of prophetic silk. Elena approached the main web, the large one in the center of the room. In the days since their last visit, new sections had been added. The spiders had been busy. She could see December dates now, clearly marked. December 7th, choice. December 15th, big rain. December 22nd, unexpected ally. And beyond that, January dates. January 3rd, visitor. January 15th, discovery. January 20th, reveal, truth. "Mom, look." Sofia pointed to a section of web Elena hadn't noticed before, positioned higher up, near the ceiling. "That one's glowing." Elena looked up. Sofia was right. One section of the web was catching the morning light in a way that made it seem luminous, almost as if it were lit from within. She moved closer, standing on an old wooden crate to get a better view. The glowing section showed a pattern she'd seen in Rosario's journals, one associated with major revelations, life-changing information. And in the center of that pattern, woven in silk that seemed to shimmer with its own light, were words that made Elena's heart stop. Proof is in the patterns. December 7th. Bring the watchers. Show them the truth. Bring the watchers. Show them the truth. Elena climbed down from the crate, her mind racing. December 7th, the day marked as choice. The web was telling her to bring people here, to show them the predictions, to demonstrate that the silk was real. But who? The IRS agents who thought Rosario was a criminal? The lawyers for Marcus Delgado who claimed she was insane? Bringing them here seemed like the worst possible strategy. Unless the Webs knew something she didn't. Unless there was a reason to reveal the truth. A pattern playing out that she couldn't yet see. What does it mean, Mom? Sofia asked, staring up at the glowing web. I think, Elena said slowly, I think it means we're supposed to stop hiding. We're supposed to show people what Aunt Rosario discovered, even if they don't believe us at first. Will they believe us? Elena thought about Peterson's warnings, about scientists who would want to study and destroy, about skeptics who would call them frauds or crazy. Some of them might, she said finally, and maybe that's enough. They spent the rest of the day in that room, studying the webs, taking photographs, making notes. Elena tried what Rosario had described, speaking aloud to the spiders, asking specific questions. What should I do about Marcus Delgado's challenge? She asked, feeling foolish but determined. Within an hour, a new web had been spun in a previously empty frame. The pattern showed a legal document with a crack running through it, and beneath it, words, false claim. Truth emerges December 7th. Elena took a photograph, her hands trembling slightly. The web had answered her question. Marcus Delgado's claim was false, and something on December 7th would prove it. What about the IRS investigation? She asked next. This time the response took longer, nearly 2 hours. But eventually a spider in a different corner began spinning, and the web that emerged showed numbers and documents, and in the center, words that made Elena's breath catch. No crime. Proof in the pattern. Show them how she knew. Show them how she knew. The same instruction as before. On December 7th, she was supposed to reveal the source of Rosario's knowledge, to demonstrate that the investments had been based on legitimate information, just information that came from an unconventional source. Mom, Sofia said quietly, I think I understand what the webs are saying. What do you mean? Aunt Rosario could see the future, right? She knew which companies would do well because the webs told her. That's not illegal. That's just knowing things before other people do. Sofia was right. Insider trading required access to confidential corporate information, material, non-public information about specific companies. But Rosario hadn't had that. She'd had something entirely different, a way of reading temporal patterns that showed which directions markets and technologies and human behaviors would trend. It was precognition, not espionage. Prophecy, not theft. The question was whether anyone would believe that. Whether anyone could be convinced that spiderwebs could predict the future with enough accuracy to guide investment decisions. On December 7th, Elena was going to have to try. They left the farm as the sun was setting, the truck loaded with more journals, more photographs, more documentation of Rosario's methods. Elena's mind was already planning for December 7th, for the moment when she would have to choose between continued secrecy and revelatory truth. The drive home was quiet. Sofia dozed against the window while Elena navigated the darkening roads, her thoughts churning. Rosario had spent 50 years in hiding, protecting the silk secrets. Now Elena was going to expose everything in a single meeting. Was she betraying her aunt's legacy or fulfilling it? She didn't know. She could only trust what the webs had told her. Bring the watchers. Show them the truth. And hope that the deep pattern Rosario had written about, the larger movement of events that shaped everything, would prove her right. The days leading up to December 7th were a careful choreography of preparation and anxiety. Elena spent every spare moment reviewing Rosario's journals, cross-referencing predictions with historical events, building what she hoped would be an irrefutable case for the legitimacy of her aunt's methods. Gerald Peterson was skeptical when she called to discuss her plan. Ms. Martinez, I understand you want to be proactive, but inviting the IRS and opposing counsel to view, what did you call it, prophetic spiderwebs? This could backfire spectacularly. They could use it as evidence that both you and your aunt are mentally unstable. Or, Elena countered, they could see that there's a genuine methodology here. Mr. Peterson, I have 50 years of documented predictions in these journals. Weather patterns, market movements, political events, all predicted weeks or months in advance, with accuracy rates above 80%. That's not delusion. That's data. There was a long pause on the line. You really believe this, don't you? I've seen it work. I found the buried chest on the exact date the web predicted, November 7th. The legal challenges came on November 23rd, exactly when the web said danger would arrive. These predictions are real, and if I can demonstrate that, we prove that Rosario's investment success was based on legitimate foresight, not illegal insider information. Another pause. Then Peterson sighed. All right, against my better judgment, I'll arrange the meeting. But Ms. Martinez, if this goes wrong, if they see this as evidence of incompetence or fraud, the consequences could be severe. You could lose everything. I know, Elena said quietly, but the Webs say this is the right choice. I have to trust them. The Webs say, Peterson repeated, his tone unreadable. Very well. I'll contact Agent Chun from the IRS and Marcus Delgado's attorney. We'll schedule for December 7th, as you requested. Where do you want this meeting to take place? At the farm. They need to see the Webs in person. Of course they do, Peterson said dryly. I'll make the arrangements. In the days that followed, Elena worked with an intensity that surprised even herself. She created a presentation documenting Rosario's prediction history, building spreadsheets that showed the correlation between web patterns and subsequent events. She organized the journals chronologically, marking key predictions with sticky notes so she could reference them quickly. Sofia helped after school, her young fingers careful as she photographed individual webs, her observations often sharper than Elena's own. This one, Sofia said one evening, pointing to a web pattern in one of the photographs, it's about people not believing at first, but then they see something that changes their minds. See how the pattern opens up here like a door? Elena looked closer. Her daughter was right. The pattern did seem to show a progression from closed to open, from rejection to acceptance. What do you think we should show them first? Elena asked. What would convince someone who doesn't believe? Sofia thought about it seriously. Something that already happened. Something they can check. Show them a prediction from a long time ago and prove it came true. Then show them a prediction about something happening soon, so they can see if that comes true too. It was brilliant strategy from a 9-year-old. Establish credibility with past accuracy, then demonstrate ongoing functionality with near-future predictions. Elena pulled out one of Rosario's journals from 2001. In March of that year, Rosario had documented a web pattern that predicted a great tower falling in September. Smoke and ash, the world changed. The entry was dated 6 months before September 11th. Another entry from 2005 predicted water overwhelming the southern city. August storm, thousands displaced. Hurricane Katrina had struck New Orleans in August of that year. Entry after entry, year after year, showing predictions that had come true with haunting accuracy. These are perfect, Elena murmured, marking the pages. These are events everyone remembers, big enough that there's no question about whether they happened. And for the future predictions? Sofia asked. Elena pulled out the photographs of the current webs at the farm. The web says December 15th will bring big rain. That's only 8 days after the meeting. If they're willing to wait, they can verify that prediction themselves. The mockery from her co-workers had reached new heights. Word had spread that Elena was claiming her aunt could predict the future with spiderwebs, and the ridicule was relentless. Hey, Elena, Marcus from the grocery store called out during her shift. Can you ask your magic spiders what the lottery numbers are going to be? I could use some of that fortune-telling money. The break room erupted in laughter. Or maybe ask them if you're going to keep this job, Brenda added with false sweetness, since apparently you're about to be investigated for inheriting stolen money. Elena kept her head down and continued working, but each comment was a small knife, cutting deeper than she wanted to admit. At Sofia's school, things were worse. Elena arrived for pickup one afternoon to find her daughter sitting alone on a bench, her backpack beside her, her face streaked with tears. Baby, what happened? Elena knelt in front of her, heart breaking at the sight. The kids are saying we're crazy, Sofia whispered. They're saying you believe in magic and that the government is going to take me away because you're not a good mom. Elena pulled her daughter into a fierce hug. That's not true. None of that is true. I'm a good mom, and nobody is taking you anywhere. But what if the spiders are wrong? What if we show people and they just laugh at us? It was the same fear Elena had been battling for days. What if she was about to humiliate herself in front of lawyers and federal agents? What if this meeting destroyed any remaining credibility she had? But she thought about Rosario's words in the journal. Stand firm in your knowing, even when you stand alone. Then they laugh, Elena said, pulling back to look Sofia in the eyes. But we'll know the truth. And sometimes knowing the truth is enough, even if nobody else believes it. Sofia wiped her eyes. Okay, I believe in the spiders, Mom. I believe in Aunt Rosario. Me too, baby. Me too. The night before the meeting, Elena couldn't sleep. She went over her presentation materials one more time, checking and rechecking that everything was organized, that her documentation was complete. At 2 a.m., her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Martinez, this is Dr. Catherine Reeves from UC Davis. I heard through channels that you're hosting some kind of demonstration tomorrow regarding your aunt's work. I would very much like to attend. Please consider this request. What you're protecting may be the most important arachnological discovery of the century. Elena stared at the text. How had Dr. Reeves found out about the meeting? Who had told her? She typed back. How did you know about tomorrow? The response came quickly. I have contacts in the legal community. Please, Ms. Martinez. I'm not your enemy. I genuinely want to understand what your aunt discovered. Let me be there. Elena thought about it. Rosario's warning about scientists who would study and destroy rang in her mind. But the web had said, bring the watchers. Maybe that included scientists as well as lawyers and government agents. Fine, she typed. 10 a.m. at the farm. I'll send you the address. She forwarded the location and put her phone down, wondering if she'd just made a terrible mistake. December 7th arrived cold and clear, the sky that deep winter blue that seemed to stretch forever. Elena dressed carefully, choosing clothes that were professional but not pretentious, her nicest jeans and a sweater her mother had given her years ago. Sofia had begged to skip school and come to the farm, but Elena had refused. This might get complicated, baby. You need to be somewhere safe. The Webs want me there, Sofia had argued. I can help explain them. She wasn't wrong, but Elena couldn't risk exposing her daughter to whatever might happen today. She'd arranged for Sofia to stay with Earl, the neighbor who'd been watching her occasionally. Elena arrived at the farm an hour early, wanting time to check the Webs, to make sure everything was ready. The morning light slanted through the burned building's broken roof, painting everything gold. She walked to the web-filled room and pushed open the red metal door. Inside, the Webs were extraordinary. In the time since her last visit, the spiders had been incredibly productive. New webs filled previously empty frames, and the main web in the center had grown larger, more complex. She approached it carefully, studying the patterns. The December 7th section was still there, still glowing slightly in the morning light. But now there was additional text beneath it, freshly spun, the silk still sticky. 5 watchers come. 3 will believe. 2 will deny but doubt. Truth speaks louder than words. Show the pattern. Trust the outcome. 5 watchers. Elena counted in her head. Agent Chun from the IRS. Marcus Delgado's lawyer, a man named Stevens. Gerald Peterson. Dr. Reeves. That was only 4. Who was the 5th? The sound of vehicles approaching pulled her from her thoughts. Elena walked outside to see a caravan of cars pulling up the dirt road. Peterson's sensible sedan led the way, followed by a black government SUV that had to be Agent Chun, then a Mercedes that screamed expensive lawyer, and finally a dusty Subaru with university parking stickers. 5 vehicles. But as they parked and people began emerging, Elena realized there were actually 5 watchers. The Mercedes had 2 occupants. Marcus Delgado himself had come along with his lawyer. 5 watchers. The Web had known exactly. Peterson approached first, his expression carefully neutral. Ms. Martinez, everyone is here, as requested. I've explained that this is an informal presentation, not a deposition or formal proceeding. They've all agreed to hear you out. Thank you, Elena said, shaking his hand. Agent Chun was next, a stern-looking man in his 50s with graying hair and sharp eyes. Ms. Martinez, I'm willing to listen to what you have to say, but I want to be clear that this doesn't stop our investigation. If we find evidence of criminal activity, we will pursue it. I understand. I'm confident you won't find any crimes, because none were committed. Marcus Delgado stepped forward next, and Elena got her first look at the distant cousin who was trying to claim Rosario's estate. He was younger than she expected, maybe 40, with slick back hair and an expensive suit that didn't quite fit the rural setting. Ms. Martinez, he said, his tone oily, I hope this little show will help you understand that my aunt clearly wasn't in her right mind when she wrote that will. Nobody in their right mind believes spiders can predict the future. We'll see, Elena said evenly. Dr. Reeves was last, a woman in her 60s with wild gray hair and intense eyes. Ms. Martinez, thank you for allowing me to attend. I promise I'm here as an observer and a scientist, not as a threat. Elena studied her face, looking for deception, but saw only genuine curiosity. We'll see about that too. She led the group toward the web-filled room, watching their reactions as they took in the burned building, the overgrown property, the isolated location. This is what she left you, Marcus Delgado said with a laugh. A burned-out wreck in the middle of nowhere? And you think this is worth fighting over? What she left me, Elena said quietly, is worth more than you can imagine, but not in the way you think. She opened the red metal door and gestured for them to enter. One by one, they filed into the room, and she watched their faces as they saw the webs for the first time. Dr. Reeves gasped audibly. Oh my God, I've never seen anything like this. The density, the complexity, the geometric precision. Agent Chun was more controlled, but Elena could see his eyes widening as he took in the sheer scope of the web collection. There must be hundreds of them. Thousands, Elena corrected. My aunt spent 50 years documenting spider silk patterns and their correlation with future events. What you're seeing is a living library of temporal prediction. Marcus Delgado's lawyer, Stevens, smirked. Temporal prediction. That's a fancy way of saying fortune-telling. No, Elena said firmly. Fortune-telling is vague, interpretative, designed to be flexible enough to apply to anything. This is specific, documented, and verifiable, and I'm going to prove it to you. She pulled out her first set of materials, the journals with predictions from years past. This is a journal entry from March 2001, 6 months before September 11th. My aunt documented a web pattern and wrote this interpretation. A great tower falling in September, smoke and ash, the world changed. Here's the photograph she took of the actual web pattern. She passed around the journal and the photograph. Even Marcus Delgado was silent as he looked at them. This could be falsified, Stevens said, but his voice lacked conviction. You could have written this after the fact. The journals are all in the same ink, aged consistently. You can have them analyzed by forensic document experts if you want. But there are dozens more examples. Hurricane Katrina, predicted 8 months in advance. The 2008 financial crisis, predicted in 2007. The 2016 election results, predicted 6 months early. She walked them through entry after entry, showing the web patterns, the written interpretations, the dates that proved the predictions had been made before the events occurred. Dr. Reeves was frantically taking notes, her scientific training warring with the evidence before her eyes. This is impossible. Spider silk patterns are determined by species-specific behaviors and environmental factors. They can't encode information about future human events. And yet they do, Elena said. My aunt spent 5 decades figuring out how to read them. The journals contain her entire methodology. Temperature, humidity, time of day, lunar phase, all of these factors influence the patterns. But beneath those surface variations are deeper structures, patterns that correlate with larger temporal movements. She pulled out her spreadsheet, the one showing prediction accuracy over time. In the early years, Aunt Rosario's accuracy was around 60%. But as her understanding deepened, the accuracy improved. By the 2010s, she was achieving 87% accuracy on specific predictions. That's statistically impossible, Dr. Reeves said. Even the best prediction models, weather forecasting, market analysis, they don't achieve that level of accuracy. Which is exactly why my aunt's investments were so successful, Elena said, turning to Agent Shun. She wasn't engaging in insider trading. She wasn't accessing confidential corporate information. She was reading patterns that showed which technologies would succeed, which markets would grow, which companies had favorable futures. It's precognition, not crime. Agent Chin's expression was unreadable. Precognition isn't real, Ms. Martinez. Then explained the September 11th prediction. Explain how she knew about Hurricane Katrina. Explain how she bought Amazon stock in 1997, Apple in 1984, Microsoft in 1986, all companies that went on to become massive successes. What? She just got lucky dozens of times in a row. Luck is more plausible than magic spiders, Stevens interjected. Then let me show you something that's happening right now, Elena said. She led them to the main web, the large one in the center of the room. This web has been growing for the past several weeks. It shows predictions for the near future. See this section here? December 15th, big rain. That's 8 days from now. You can verify it yourselves. Wait until December 15th and see if significant rain arrives. California gets rain in December. Marcus Delgado scoffed. That's not a prediction. That's just weather. We're in a drought, Elena countered. The forecast for December 15th currently shows clear skies. But the web says rain, significant rain. We'll see who's right. She pointed to another section. January 3rd, visitor. Someone unexpected will arrive at this property. January 15th, discovery. Something important will be found. She looked at Agent Shun. You want proof that this isn't fraud? Wait until these dates. See if the predictions come true. If they don't, you can arrest me for whatever crimes you think I've committed. But if they do, you have to admit there's something real here. The room fell silent. Everyone was staring at the web, at the intricate patterns that supposedly held knowledge of events yet to come. Dr. Reeves broke the silence. Ms. Martinez, if what you're saying is true, if spiders genuinely can sense and encode information about future events, this is the most significant scientific discovery in modern history. It would revolutionize our understanding of causality, time, consciousness itself. I know, Elena said quietly, which is why it needs to be protected, not exploited. My aunt spent her life guarding this knowledge because she knew what would happen if it became public. Governments would weaponize it. Corporations would commercialize it. The spiders themselves would be harvested and destroyed in the name of research. Or, Stevens said, it's all an elaborate delusion that you're mentally ill and concocted, and that you've now bought into. The simplest explanation is usually the correct one. Then explain the stock certificates, Elena shot back. Explain how a woman living alone on a burned farm accumulated $500 million in assets. That money is real. Those investments are real. The only question is how she knew what to invest in. Peterson spoke up for the first time. I've reviewed the estate documentation thoroughly. Every stock purchase, every bond, every investment is properly documented with legitimate brokerages. There's no evidence of illegal activity. The only unusual aspect is the consistently excellent timing of the purchases. Consistently excellent timing, Agent Chin repeated. That's another way of saying suspiciously lucky. Or suspiciously informed, Elena said. But informed by what? By spiderwebs. I know how it sounds. I know it seems impossible. But you're standing in a room full of evidence. 50 years of documented predictions. Hundreds of verifiable correlations between web patterns and subsequent events. At what point does impossible become improbable? And at what point does improbable become the only logical explanation? Marcus Delgado had been quiet, walking around the room, examining the webs with an expression that had shifted from mockery to something more complex. Now he spoke up. Let's say, hypothetically, that this is real, that these webs can predict the future. That still doesn't mean you deserve the inheritance. My aunt spent time with me in her final years. I visited her, brought her groceries, checked on her. You barely knew her. Why should you get everything just because you can read some spider patterns? Elena turned to face him directly. Did you visit her? Did you really? His expression flickered. Of course I did. Multiple times. I was the only family who cared enough to check on the old woman. That's interesting, Elena said, pulling out another journal, this one from 2018. Because Aunt Rosario kept detailed records of her visitors. And your name doesn't appear anywhere. Not once. She flipped through the pages, showing entries that documented the rare visitors Rosario had received. Dr. Reeves's name appeared several times, along with notes about their discussions of web patterns. A few other researchers, some delivery drivers, but no Marcus Delgado. She must have forgotten to write it down, Marcus said, but his voice had lost its confident edge. Or you're lying, Elena said bluntly. The web predicted this, you know. November 23rd, danger. It knew someone would challenge the will with false claims. And it also predicted what would happen today. December 7th, truth emerges. You never visited Aunt Rosario. You barely knew she existed until you heard about the estate value. You saw an opportunity to grab wealth you didn't earn and didn't deserve. Stephen stepped forward. That's a serious accusation, Ms. Martinez. Do you have proof? I have Aunt Rosario's journals, 50 years of meticulous record-keeping. I have testimony from neighbors who can confirm that my client, she gestured to herself, visited the property, while Mr. Delgado never did. And I have this. She pulled out her phone and brought up a photograph she'd taken earlier that week. It showed a section of web she hadn't mentioned yet, one that had appeared just 3 days ago. The pattern clearly showed words, false cousin, never came, seeks only gold, truth will stop him. She showed it to everyone in the room. This web was spun on December 4th, 3 days ago. It predicted that Marcus Delgado's claims would be revealed as false during today's meeting. Marcus's face had gone pale. This is insane. You're all believing this? Spiderwebs can't write in English. Someone made this. She made this to frame me. Then explain the September 11th prediction, Dr. Reeves said quietly. Her scientific skepticism was clearly warring with the evidence before her. Explain the pattern from March 2001 that predicted a great tower falling in September. Elena Martinez was a teenager then, living nowhere near this property. She couldn't have created that prediction after the fact. Stevens was scanning through the journals Elena had provided, his expression increasingly troubled. Mr. Delgado, I need to speak with you privately. No, Marcus said. This is all fake. It has to be fake. But his conviction was crumbling, and everyone in the room could see it. Agent Chen had been examining the spreadsheets of prediction accuracy, cross-referencing them with the journal entries. Now he looked up at Elena. Ms. Martinez, I'm not prepared to say I believe in prophetic spiderwebs, but I am prepared to say that I see no evidence of insider trading or other financial crimes. The pattern of investments, while unusually successful, appears to be based on a consistent methodology, however unconventional that methodology might be. Elena felt something loosen in her chest. So the investigation is over? I'll need to file a report. But unless we find evidence of actual illegal activity, which seems increasingly unlikely, yes, the investigation will be closed. He paused. Though I'd like to come back on December 15th to see if the rain prediction comes true. You're welcome anytime, Elena said. Dr. Reeves was still frantically photographing the webs, her scientific curiosity overwhelming her skepticism. Ms. Martinez, please, I need to study this properly. This could be the most important research of my career, of anyone's career. Let me document the patterns, run proper studies, publish findings. No, Elena said firmly. This isn't about advancing scientific careers. This is about protecting knowledge that the world isn't ready for. If you publish papers about this, if you bring the academic community here, it will destroy everything. The spiders will be taken, studied, dissected. The farm will be overrun. The predictions will be used by people who don't understand their responsibility. But science requires sharing findings, peer review, replication. Science also requires ethics, Elena interrupted. And ethics means recognizing when knowledge should be protected rather than published. I'll let you visit occasionally under supervision. You can observe and take notes for your own understanding. But no publications, no public announcements. This stays private. Dr. Reeves looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Elena's expression stopped her. All right, for now. But Ms. Martinez, you're sitting on a discovery that could reshape human understanding of causality and time. Eventually, that knowledge will need to be shared. Eventually, Elena agreed. But on my terms when the time is right. The Webbs will tell me when that is. Stevens had finished his whispered conversation with Marcus Delgado. Now, he stepped forward, his expression professional but strained. Ms. Martinez, after reviewing the evidence and discussing the matter with my client, we've decided to withdraw the challenge to the will. It appears there may have been some misunderstanding about the nature of Mr. Delgado's relationship with the deceased. Misunderstanding, Elena repeated. That's a polite way of saying he lied about visiting her. Stevens didn't respond to that. We'll file the necessary paperwork with the court. The estate should be free to proceed through probate without further challenges from our side. Marcus Delgado wouldn't meet Elena's eyes. He stalked out of the room without another word, Stevens hurrying after him. 4 watchers remained. Elena thought about the Webb's prediction. 3 will believe. 2 will deny but doubt. Agent Chun, she said, do you believe the Webbs are real? He was quiet for a long moment. I believe there's something here I don't understand. Whether it's actual temporal prediction or some kind of incredibly sophisticated pattern recognition that mimics precognition, I can't say. But I don't think you or your aunt were criminals. That's enough for my purposes. Deny but doubt. 1. Dr. Reeves? The scientist was still photographing Webbs, her hands shaking slightly. I believe there's a phenomenon here that deserves serious study. I believe your aunt documented something extraordinary. Whether it's actually seeing the future or whether there's a more prosaic explanation involving environmental sensing and probability calculation, I don't know yet. But it's real. The correlations are too strong to be coincidence. Deny but doubt. 2. Mr. Peterson? Her lawyer smiled slightly. Ms. Martinez, I stopped being surprised by impossible things around the time you show me $500 million in stock certificates from a woman who lived on a burned farm. Do I believe spiderwebs can predict the future? I believe you believe it. And I believe the evidence is compelling enough that I'm not going to dismiss it out of hand. That's about as far as my rational legal mind can stretch. 3 will believe. So Peterson was the third, the one whose belief was qualified but genuine. That meant Dr. Reeves and Agent Chun were the 2 who denied but doubted. The Webb had been precisely correct. As the group prepared to leave, Elena felt exhausted but vindicated. The challenges were ending. The investigation was closing. The truth had emerged, just as the Webb predicted. But as they walked toward their vehicles, Dr. Reeves pulled Elena aside. Ms. Martinez, there's something you should know. I wasn't entirely honest about how I found out about today's meeting. Elena's guard went up immediately. What do you mean? I didn't hear through legal channels. I had a dream 3 nights ago. A vivid dream about spiderwebs with words in them, telling me to come here on December 7th. I almost ignored it, told myself it was just my subconscious processing my interest in your aunt's work. But the dream was so specific, so insistent, that I couldn't dismiss it. Elena stared at her. You dreamed about the Webbs? Not just dreamed. The Webb spoke to me, told me I needed to be here, that I had a role to play in protecting this knowledge. I've never had a dream like that before. I'm a scientist, Ms. Martinez. I don't believe in prophetic dreams, but I couldn't ignore it. Sofia carries the sight, perhaps even stronger than yours. And apparently, so did others, people the Webbs chose to involve, to recruit, to bring into the circle of knowledge. What role? Elena asked quietly. I don't know yet, but I think the Webbs will tell us when the time is right. After everyone left, Elena stood alone in the Webb-filled room, processing everything that had happened. The legal challenge had been withdrawn. The IRS investigation was ending. The truth had been revealed to 5 watchers, 3 of whom believed, 2 of whom doubted, but would remember. It had gone exactly as the web predicted. She approached the main web and studied it again. The December 7th section had changed. New silk had been added while they were all standing there, spiders working invisibly in the background. The new text said, "Truth spoken. Watchers saw. Protection begins. Prepare for December 15th. December 15th. Big rain. The first test of whether the others would truly believe or whether their skepticism would return once they left this room. Elena pulled out her phone and checked the weather forecast. Still showing clear skies for December 15th. Sunny and dry, typical California winter weather. But the web said rain. Significant rain. One of them would be wrong. And Elena knew which one she trusted. She locked up the room and drove home, her mind already moving to the next challenge. The estate would proceed through probate now. The assets would be authenticated and transferred. She would have resources to rebuild the farm, to create proper facilities for studying and protecting the webs. And she would have to decide what to do with the knowledge Rosario had left behind, how to use it responsibly, how to protect it from those who would exploit it. But that was a problem for the future. For now, she'd survived the greatest challenge. She'd stood firm in her knowing, even when the world called her mad. And the world had blinked first. When Elena picked up Sofia from Earl's house that evening, her daughter took one look at her face and grinned. It worked, didn't it? The webs were right. The webs were right, Elena confirmed, pulling her into a hug. About everything. I knew they would be. When do we get to go back to the farm? Soon, baby. Very soon. But first, we wait for December 15th. The days that followed were strange. Elena went back to work at the grocery store, but everything felt different now. The mockery continued. Her co-workers still whispered and laughed, but it didn't touch her the way it had before. She knew something they didn't. She had evidence they couldn't see. And soon, very soon, the rain would come and prove she'd been right all along. Brenda cornered her in the break room on December 12th. So, I heard your little spider presentation didn't go so well. Marcus Delgado is telling everyone you're completely delusional, that you showed a bunch of random spider webs to lawyers and government agents and expected them to believe in magic. Elena smiled calmly. Is that what he's saying? He withdrew his legal challenge, but only because his lawyer advised him it wasn't worth the fight. Not because he believes your crazy aunt could predict the future. Believe what you want, Brenda. The truth doesn't require your approval. The older woman's face reddened. You know what your problem is, Elena? You think you're special. You think you're better than the rest of us now that you've got this inheritance. But you're not. You're the same struggling, single mother you always were, except now you're delusional on top of it. Elena thought about the $516 million that would soon be hers, about the farm that would become a center for studying temporal patterns, about the gift she would pass on to Sofia, and that Sofia would pass on to the next generation. You're right, she said quietly. I'm not better than anyone, but I am different. I see things other people don't. And that's not delusion, Brenda. That's just vision. She walked away before her manager could respond, feeling lighter than she had in months. December 15th arrived with that same crystal-clear California sky. Elena checked the weather forecast obsessively throughout the morning, still showing sunny and dry, no precipitation expected. But at 2 p.m., the first clouds appeared on the western horizon. By 3 o'clock, they'd covered half the sky. By 4 o'clock, the first drops were falling. By 5 o'clock, it was pouring, the kind of drenching winter rain that California hadn't seen in years. The drought-hardened ground couldn't absorb it fast enough. Water pooled in streets, overwhelmed storm drains, turned the dry hills green almost overnight. Elena stood on her apartment balcony with Sofia, watching the rain fall in sheets, and laughed. Just laughed, pure and joyful and triumphant. Her phone started buzzing. Text messages coming in rapid succession. From Agent Chun, I'm watching the rain. I don't know what to think. From Dr. Reeves, the prediction was correct. Elena, we need to talk about what this means. From Peterson, I'm standing in my office watching the wettest December day in 5 years. Your aunt's webs were right. I don't know how, but they were right. Even from Marcus Delgado's lawyer, Stevens, Ms. Martinez, I owe you an apology. I'm watching the rain, and remembering what the web predicted. This isn't coincidence. I don't know what it is, but it's not coincidence. Elena saved the messages, documentation of the moment when skeptics began to believe. The rain continued through the night and into the next day. The news was calling it an unprecedented weather event. Meteorologists baffled by the sudden atmospheric shift that had brought moisture from the Pacific without any of the usual warning signs. But Elena had been warned. The Webbs had told her, 8 days in advance, exactly when the rain would come. The following week, Gerald Peterson called with news that made Elena's hands shake. The final authentication came through. All of the stock certificates are verified as legitimate. The transfers are being processed. Ms. Martinez, the total value of the estate after taxes and fees is $543 million. And it's all yours. $543 million. Elena sat down heavily, trying to process the number. What do I do with it? She asked, her voice small. Whatever you want. Invest it, spend it, donate it, use it to rebuild the farm. You have complete control. After she hung up, Elena sat in silence for a long time. This was real. All of it was real. The Webbs, the predictions, the inheritance, the responsibility. She thought about Rosario's letter, about the charge to rebuild the farm, to protect the knowledge, to pass it on to Sofia and future generations. She called Peterson back. I want to set up a foundation. The Rosario Martinez Foundation for Temporal Research and Environmental Conservation. I want to fund the restoration of the farm, create facilities for studying the Webbs, and provide grants for research into pattern recognition and prediction methodologies. That's very generous. How much do you want to allocate to the foundation? Elena thought about it. She didn't need $500 million. She needed security, yes, and resources to do the work. But the rest could serve a higher purpose. $400 million. I'll keep the rest for personal use and Sofia's future. But $400 million goes into the foundation. Peterson was quiet for a moment. Ms. Martinez, that's one of the largest private foundation endowments in California. You're sure about this? I'm sure. The money came from the Webbs. It should go back to protecting them and studying them properly. Then I'll draw up the paperwork. The transformation of the farm began in January. Elena hired contractors to rebuild the main building, this time with proper facilities for climate control, observation areas, and research spaces. She brought in architects who specialized in sustainable design, creating structures that would blend with the landscape rather than dominating it. Dr. Catherine Reeves became the foundation's first research director. Her scientific expertise, combined with her growing understanding of the Webb's capabilities, making her perfect for the role. She brought in a small team of carefully vetted researchers, all of whom signed non-disclosure agreements and pledged to approach the work with respect rather than exploitation. The journals were professionally preserved and digitized, Rosario's 50 years of knowledge made safe from time and decay. The Webbs themselves were protected under controlled conditions, the spiders allowed to spin and create without interference, their patterns photographed and studied, but never destroyed. And on January 3rd, exactly as predicted, a visitor arrived. Elena was at the farm overseeing construction when a dusty pickup truck pulled up. An elderly woman climbed out, moving slowly but with purpose. "Are you Elena Martinez?" she called out. "I am. Can I help you?" The woman walked closer, and Elena saw that she was Native American, probably in her 80s, with long gray hair and eyes that held the same knowing quality Rosario's had possessed in photographs. "My name is Mary Whitefeather. I'm Chumash from the coast. Your aunt wrote to me years ago, said that when the time was right, someone would continue her work. The dreams told me that time is now." Elena felt chills run down her spine. Dreams? The spider dreams. They've been coming to me for 3 months now, showing me this place, showing me you. The Webbs want me here. They have things to teach me, and things I can teach you. The January 3rd prediction. Visitor. An unexpected ally bringing knowledge Elena didn't know she needed. "Come in," Elena said, gesturing toward the research building. "I think we have a lot to talk about." Mary Whitefeather spent the next week at the farm, sharing knowledge that her people had preserved for generations. The Chumash had long understood that spiders were sacred messengers, that their webs contained wisdom for those who knew how to read them. What Rosario had discovered through decades of scientific observation, Mary's ancestors had known through cultural tradition. Together, they began to piece together a more complete understanding of the phenomenon. The webs weren't predicting the future so much as sensing the present so deeply that probable futures became visible. Like reading the trajectory of a thrown ball before it landed, the spiders detected patterns in electromagnetic fields, air pressure, seismic activity, even human intention, and translated those patterns into silk. It wasn't magic. It was sensitivity far beyond human perception. But it requires the right mind to interpret, Mary explained. Not everyone can read the webs. It's a gift passed down through bloodlines. Your aunt had it. You have it. Your daughter has it even stronger. How do you know about Sofia? Mary smiled. The webs told me. They say she'll be the greatest reader your family has produced in generations. When she's ready, when she's old enough to understand the responsibility, she'll see patterns we can't even imagine. Elena thought about her daughter, about the dreams Sofia had been having, about the way she could read webs that Elena struggled with. How do I protect her? How do I prepare her for that kind of gift? You teach her slowly. You let her grow into it naturally. And you make sure she understands that the gift is not for personal gain, but for helping others. The webs show us what's coming so we can prepare, so we can warn those who need warning, so we can make choices that lead to better futures. On January 15th, the day marked as Discovery in the webs, construction workers uncovered something extraordinary beneath the burned section of the main building. Elena got the call at 9 a.m. Ms. Martinez, you need to come see this. We were clearing the foundation, and we found a chamber. A sealed chamber. She drove to the farm immediately, her heart pounding. Another hidden room, like the one that had held the chest. What had Rosario buried now? The chamber was small, maybe 8 feet square, lined with the same adobe as the building above. And inside were shelves, dozens of them, filled with glass cases. But these cases didn't hold artifacts or gold. They held silk, preserved spiderwebs, hundreds of them, each one carefully mounted and labeled. Elena examined the labels with trembling hands. Each one showed a date and a prediction going back decades. These were Rosario's most important webs, the ones she considered too valuable to leave in the open room, too critical to risk losing. And in the center of the chamber, on a pedestal, was a single web unlike any Elena had seen before. It was enormous, nearly 6 feet across, and the pattern was so complex it hurt to look at directly. Mary White Feather, who'd come with Elena, gasped when she saw it. The great pattern. I've heard of these, but never seen one. My grandmother said they appear once in a generation, showing not just years but decades ahead, showing the major movements of the world. Elena stepped closer, studying the intricate design. She could see dates scattered throughout. Some she recognized, events that had already occurred. The 2008 financial crisis, the 2016 election, the 2020 pandemic, but others were still to come. 2027, 2031, 2045. Major events marked but not explained, their details too complex for her current understanding to decode. This is what she wanted me to find, Elena whispered. This is the deep pattern she wrote about. The larger movements. Can you read it? Mary asked. Not yet, but I will. We will. She looked at the elderly woman. Will you help me? Will you teach me to see what this is showing? That's why the webs brought me here. The months that followed transformed Elena's life completely. She quit her job at the grocery store, ignoring Brenda's knowing smirk. She moved out of the cramped apartment and into a modest house near the farm, close enough to work there daily, but far enough to give Sofia a normal childhood. The foundation grew, carefully and quietly. Dr. Reeves published a paper, heavily redacted to protect the farm's location and the specific methodologies, about anomalous pattern recognition in spider silk structures. It was vague enough not to draw unwanted attention, but specific enough to establish scientific legitimacy. Agent Chin became an unexpected ally. his FBI contacts helping to shield the foundation from regulatory interference. He never fully admitted he believed in the webs, but he came to every predicted event, documenting their accuracy with the thoroughness of a career investigator. And the predictions continued to come true. February 20th, important letter. Elena received notification that the estate had been fully settled, all challenges resolved, all assets officially transferred to her name. March 8th, unexpected support. A wealthy philanthropist who'd heard about the foundation donated an additional $10 million, saying he believed in preserving unconventional knowledge. April 14th, Sofia's gift emerges. Elena's daughter read a web pattern that none of the adults could decipher, correctly predicting a small earthquake 3 days before it occurred. By summer, the farm had been completely transformed. The main building stood rebuilt, beautiful in its blend of traditional adobe and modern, sustainable design. Inside were research labs, observation rooms, and a library housing Rosario's journals and the preserved webs from the hidden chamber. The foundation employed 12 people now, researchers and support staff who'd all been carefully vetted and who all understood the sacred responsibility of their work. And the mockery that had once followed Elena everywhere had transformed into something else. Respect, yes, but also curiosity. People who'd laughed at her now wanted to know more. Scientists who'd dismissed the webs now requested visits. Even Marcus Delgado had reached out through his lawyer, apologizing for the false claims and asking if he could tour the facility. Elena allowed the tour, watching his face as he saw what his great-aunt had built, what Elena had preserved and expanded. "I was wrong," he said quietly when they finished. "About all of it. I'm sorry." "Apology accepted," Elena said, and she meant it. The webs had shown her that holding grudges poisoned the future. Forgiveness, even when undeserved, created better patterns. On a warm evening in July, Elena stood on the porch of the main building with Sofia, watching the sun set over the hills. The property was alive with activity now. Researchers documenting new web patterns, construction crews finishing the last of the visitor center, Mary Whitefeather teaching a class on indigenous understanding of natural prophecy. "Mom," Sofia said, "do you think Aunt Rosario knew this would happen? That we'd turn the farm into something big?" Elena thought about the great pattern web in the chamber, about the dates it showed, about Rosario's letter written years before her death. "I think she knew exactly what would happen. I think she saw all of this, planned for all of this. We're just following the pattern she laid out. But we're making choices too, right? We're not just doing what the webs tell us." It was a profound question from a 9-year-old. Elena knelt down to her daughter's level. "The webs show us what's likely, but we always have choice. We can follow the pattern or forge our own path. The gift isn't about obeying prophecy. It's about understanding probability and making wise decisions based on that understanding." Sofia nodded seriously. "I want to learn more. I want to read the webs like you and Mary do." "You will, baby. In time. But for now, you just get to be a kid." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Elena thought about the year that had passed. 12 months ago, she'd been a struggling single mother living paycheck to paycheck, mocked for inheriting a burned-out farm, drowning in doubt and fear. Now she stood on property worth millions, directing a foundation with a $400 million endowment, preserving knowledge that could help humanity navigate the uncertain future. The webs had shown the way. Rosario had prepared the path. But Elena had chosen to walk it, had found the courage to trust what others called impossible. Her phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Reeves. "New web, just appeared in Observation Room 3. It shows something for December 25th, this Christmas. Says joy returns, circle complete, new beginning. Thought you'd want to know." Elena smiled. Christmas was 5 months away, but the webs were already preparing them, already showing what was coming. She typed back, "Thank you. I'll be there in the morning to photograph it." Sofia tugged at her sleeve. "Can we stay at the farm tonight? Sleep in the apartment we built?" The foundation had constructed a small residence on the property for overnight stays. Elena had furnished it simply but comfortably, a home away from home. "Sure, baby. Let me get our things from the car." As they settled in for the night, Elena found herself thinking about all the people who doubted her. Brenda at the grocery store, the parents at Sofia's school, her own sister Rosa, who'd threatened legal action and then gone silent when the inheritance was validated. She could have spent her energy resenting them, proving them wrong, rubbing her success in their faces. But the Webbs had taught her something more important. That vindication wasn't about making others admit they were wrong. It was about knowing you were right and living that truth regardless of what anyone else believed. The greatest victory wasn't proving the skeptics wrong. It was building something so undeniably real that eventually the truth spoke for itself. As Sofia fell asleep in the next room, Elena sat at the small desk and opened one of Rosario's journals, one she hadn't read before. It was dated from 2016, near the end of her aunt's life. One entry caught her eye. "I am old now, and my time grows short. But I am not afraid, because I have seen the pattern. Elena will come. She will find what I've left. She will protect it and grow it into something greater than I could have imagined. And her daughter, my dear Sofia, whom I will never meet in this life, she will carry the gift into the future, reading patterns I can only dream of. The silk has shown me that 3 generations from now, someone descended from our bloodline will use this knowledge to prevent a catastrophe that would have killed millions. I won't live to see it, Elena won't live to see it, but Sofia's grandchildren will. And all of it begins here, with a burned farm and a woman, brave enough to believe what everyone else called impossible. That is legacy. That is purpose. That is why the gift matters. To whoever reads this, know that you are part of a pattern larger than yourself. Trust the silk. Protect the knowledge. And never let the world convince you that impossible means untrue." Elena closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. Rosario had seen not just years but generations ahead. She'd known that Elena would succeed, that Sofia would thrive, that the gift would continue long after they were all gone. And somewhere in the future, someone they would never meet would use this knowledge to save lives, to prevent disaster, to make the world better. That was the real treasure hidden in the burned silk farm. Not $500 million, though that certainly helped. Not fame or recognition or vindication over skeptics. The real treasure was purpose, was knowing that your life mattered, that your choices rippled forward through time, that the courage to believe in the impossible created possibilities for everyone who came after. Elena walked to the window and looked out over the farm, at the buildings that now stood where ruins had been, at the lights in the research facilities where people were studying patterns that would help humanity navigate the uncertain future. She'd bought this property for nothing, they'd said. Thrown away her savings on a rotting pile of wood with a door. But inside the roots of that burned farm, she'd found $516 million worth of assets. And she found something worth far more than money. She'd found her purpose, her legacy, her truth. The Spiderwebs had shown her tomorrow's date, and every day since, they'd been proven right. Anyone could change the world if they were brave enough to trust what they saw, patient enough to wait for the pattern to emerge, and strong enough to stand firm when everyone else called them crazy. Because sometimes what the world calls impossible is simply waiting for someone courageous enough to prove it true. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.